Hi, good afternoon. I haven't filmed a TikTok. Oh, this isn't TikTok, sorry. I haven't filmed a YouTube video. Apologies. I haven't filmed a YouTube video in quite a long time. I'm also in a new setting. I'm in my studio now instead of my loft. Yeah, I'm going to read some of my notes from my notebook that I took in London during London Fashion Week and I didn't get the opportunity to make videos on. I was reading about Dilara Findikoglu at the same time that I was reading about Leigh Bowery, and I was getting ready to review Dilara's show for SHOWstudio, and I started taking a ton of notes that I got really into. And if you watch the SHOWstudio, you'll hear me share some of these perspectives, but why not do a full deep dive? And just for background and context, Dilara Findikoglu is a 34-year-old Turkish English fashion designer. She graduated from the prestigious fashion school Central St. Martin's. Her work revolves around punk aesthetics and feminist politics. She debuted at London Fashion Week in 2016, and a lot of her work orients itself around lingerie, religious, and subcultural references while dealing with challenging misogyny and oppressive structures. The other subject of focus in this video is Leigh Bowery, who was a highly influential Australian performance artist, promoter, and designer who died at age 33 and served as a muse and a highly influential figure in the art world. Leigh Bowery was a pivotal, transformative figure in the nightlife scene, especially in London and New York, and designed extremely impactful costumes and fashion work that has an impact on the industry to this day. So we were taking a look at Dilara Findikoglu's fall 2024. It looks like what my takeaway from the show was I said I always assumed her goal was to synthesize her references and inspirations and place them into her collections. Galliano, McQueen, Jean Paul Gaultier, Vivienne Westwood. I have always thought, and maybe I'm wrong, but I thought that it was 100% intentional, that she is publicly synthesizing and paying honor to and homage to some of these designers while still casting her own identity through her work. Obviously, she finds value in those ways of constructing womanhood. To me, this is my opinion, just not something she said, but it seemed obvious to me that she found value in these ways of recognizing and identifying womanhood in fashion design, especially through like this kind of punky, transgressive, Vivienne Westwood-esque form of design. And she was pushing herself through that in order to cast her own identity in fashion, and I honestly didn't find anything wrong with that. So if something is of a certain time period, it may, and that's a design element that a designer uses and references a lot, it may look like they're referencing that designer because people don't have a critical understanding of the historical context that those design references come from. And I think it's important to identify that that may be a distinction that we're not able to detect because we may not be experts. I have in quotes mass ritual to end toxic masculinity about her show to create a different reality, and the previous collections were about fighting and resistance, and it seems like she's not fighting anymore. It seems like she's like praising and worshiping almost the idea of multiplicative womanhood in her collections. I feel like the early collections, especially around the time of her graduation, were very like fight back, very oriented around resistance and combating and toughness and strength. And I think that she's kind of settled in her design work into this view of there is a constant need for resistance as women when going against the patriarchy and patriarchal oppression and all forms of oppression. And she's kind of creating what I find like armor and shields, and also this vision of multiplicity throughout each look, every collection. Instead of saying like we have to fight now, it's kind of just like we have to fight always, and we're always navigating through this fight. And so she just creates these different versions of woman and identity to show that, existence can be a part of resistance. It says divine feminine energy crafted to represent a character. The movement was by Pat Bogulowski at Margiela and here, and it's about creating a new world. Yeah, to me it seemed like the movement design, it seemed like the intention was to create a new world, a new reality, doing some world building on the runway, which I think is really valuable. And then I talked at SHOWstudio, and I think I talked in one of my TikTok videos about how the reason why I'm saying that I think she's casting these different visions of womanhood and kind of creating this idea of multiplied womanhood and not just a singular identity is because you have these corporate clothes cast against these like BDSM lingerie kind of dark undertoned fashions, and it kind of speaks to not only the, I hate to keep saying multiplicity, but like the multiplicity of the lives of women, but also the multiplicity of existence that exists for different kinds of women. Like not only do we have these broad identities that include being a mother, being a child, being a daughter, being a sister, being a leader at work, having to follow sometimes at work, being sensual, being desired, being desirable, but also desiring others, having power, needing power, etc., etc. Like she's casting that into one woman, but she's also representing it across different women's identities on the runway. And I think she does that on purpose. I think a lot of people reduce that collection down to its supposed hypersexuality, but I think it's a way of pointing out that regardless of what women do, and no matter how women get dressed or show themselves in the world, they are still sexualized and reduced to their sexual identities. And that has nothing to do with how women get dressed or anything like that. It's just something that's cast and thrust upon women. And I also spoke in my TikTok about how in these kind of business contexts, you may feel, especially in terms of like white feminism or power feminism, where the goal is to obtain the power that cis white men seem to have in society, you may feel that you have power in these contexts, but are you not just perpetuating these oppressive contexts for other people when you're seeking that kind of power? You are. And so you also, as a woman, don't even ever have that same amount of power as men have in the work context, no matter how you climb up the ladder or how close you get to shattering the glass ceiling. You still are a woman, and you're still positioned to navigate that form of oppression. And it can feel like you're doing this performance of strength and this performance of control in terms of your identity in a way that may play out in the same way as BDSM and things like that, and adult relational contexts. I said I see her work as a symbolic expression of her love for transgressive movements and designers who have designed in response to them. Women hold, I don't think I'm going to edit this, that's why I'm saying that. I said it's women holding their belongings with them to show their multiplicity. So you're seeing all the different lives that women have and all their responsibilities that they have to live, and, you know, kind of the fact that women don't get the freedom of compartmentalizing their lives always. Like there are different parts and axes of women's lives, but they're kind of carrying that baggage with them at all times. I said she collects Victorian tops. If you watch her Nowness episode, you can see kind of her old house. She collects Victorian tops and likes the look of past lives and wardrobe, mixed media of stories and mythologies. And then to cast that against kind of what I was reading about Leigh Bowery, I loved in the article, which I'll link below and put the title of below, they talk about Leigh Bowery's erotic visuality, expressions of desire, inaccessible expression of transgressive sexuality, sexual obedience, self-dismissal, and self-realization, right? Subjectivity, being less disruptive or more disruptive, the negation of the self, corporal signifiers of femininity. And corporality, or like something being corporal, is of or relating to the body rather than the person's spirit, sorry. For Leo Bersani, 1995, it is the heterosexual fear that homosexual men are experiencing a privileged happiness that, despite its supposed normative superiority, heterosexuality can never access. Which I think is really interesting, because I would draw a parallel between that vision of constructing identity in the public eye and being perceived as being able to access like a feeling of freedom. I feel that men feel that about the way that women construct sexuality in the public. There are a lot of men who mock women in part because they're jealous that women get to express themselves in these ways that are free and fun, and they are not only jealous of it or envy the freedom women seem like they have, but they partake in it for the first time and get to experience that freedom when they have these opportunities to mock women, and they enjoy it. They enjoy the freedom of it. They want to wear a mini skirt. They want to be fabulous. They want to be beautiful. They want to wear a wig. They want to have long hair that they can flip and wear makeup and pout and be free to express themselves in this way. And they enjoy the time that they spend mocking women in these contexts, because they don't actually think what women are doing is negative wholly. They're jealous. They are envious that women get the freedom to do these things. And it makes no sense, because women are subjugated to violence for these things. Women are oppressed. Women are paid disproportionately less than men for the same work because of these aspects of women's identities. But it still is the case that one could theorize that men envy what they perceive to be the freedom of being able to tap into being emotional, crying, having fun with your friends, being sensual with your friends, being comfortable with your friends, dancing in these certain ways, like the way that TikTok dances popped off, and it encouraged so many men to put on tight clothes and mock those dances. It's like to say this is every girl, this is every teenage girl right now, this is every young woman. I drew the parallel there between that and the way that Dilara constructs women's sexuality. I think that men are very often envious of, or I would say one could theorize that men can sometimes, in patterns of behavior as a class of people, be jealous of and envious of the ways that women get to express their sensuality and sexuality and be praised for those forms of expression that are expected to be, minimized or constructed in a really controlled, forced way for men. Like, men's expressions of gender identity and sexuality are very, very limited. Like, men can't do anything without being accused of being gay and thus seen in a negative light as a result of homophobia. And I think that that's part of why people are so critical of Dilara showing women in lingerie on this runway freely expressing themselves. So I said about Dilara, she's just demonstrating an erotic visuality, an expression of complexity and multiplicity, and ownership over her expressions of desire. And that's where I think that transitions us into the idea that because she's casting women in this one way, as sexual, one could say as sexual because they're in lingerie or in these kind of typically sexualized garments and things like that, and undergarments. I think that people wanted to see it in an inherently negative light because it seems like they're being forced to look that way and it's reductive, and that's not feminism. But I think it is feminism to show that women exist in a lot of different ways, including as sexual beings, and that there's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing inherently wrong with women being sexual or being seen as sexual even. It's not women's responsibility to entirely upend histories of women's identities being constructed in a singular way. Women can embrace those parts of their identity as long as they're also working to challenge the idea that that's not the only way that women should be seen. Like, women don't have a singular identity, but it doesn't mean they're not ever allowed to tap into stereotypes, including harmful stereotypes. And I would say the same is the case for racialization when it comes to like blackness. Like, I'm not going to not embrace parts of black culture that people look at negatively just because they reduce us to those negative stereotypes. Even if you see it negatively, the negative aspect is we're not only that. We are everything, just like everyone is. And that's how you end oppressive ideals about groups. It doesn't have to be that you eliminate what is a part of your culture. It's that you don't reduce parts of any culture to one singular thing, especially not only the perceived bad parts. So I said she's undermining cultures of social obedience. She allows for self-actualization in terms of representing the complexity of women. When she blends erotic aesthetics with work uniform, she abstracts what it is to be a woman or to appear as one, and she allows us to question the integrity of that category in the first place by including women who are systematically denied their personhood. So women who are in the lingerie in this way, in the singularized way, powerful women, women in the business suits, and all axes of their personhood from private self to public persona. And I felt like this collection really, really dealt with public and private persona, which I felt was interesting. If she's showing that women are multidimensional always, women are not just business, but they're also not just sex, you have to think about gender essentialism in the first place. Are women just weaker? Are women just whatever else is cast upon women in terms of these reductive gender essentialist ideas? No. Is a woman ever just anything? No. The book says, or the journal says, the contrast between Bowery's use of normative and non-normative dress in his garments draws attention to normativizing facets of fashion and how the assumed visual correlation between the female and the feminine is in fact misguided. So again, it goes back to these ideas of why these reductive views of what womanhood is take away from women and take away from everyone. It takes away from queer culture, it takes away from men, and it's just generally reductive and not beneficial to anyone. Bowery, it says, could occupy the feminine position just as well as any woman. Willful bizarreness of the costume argues that fashion is entirely artificial, because when we think about what we have in terms of visions of what womanhood is, I think that's kind of my main point here. It's not to say that the things that are feminine should not be categorized as feminine. I think it's just to say that feminine things shouldn't be the only way that we see women, because especially if you've read Stone Witch Blues or you're familiar with any lesbian history books, it is reductive to see women as just what we view as feminine. Like, we can broaden what a woman is, and we can broaden what a man is, and we can broaden what's in between, and kind of converge on the ideas that it's okay for things to have structure, but it doesn't mean that every person has to have a singular idea oriented around that structure. And when Dilara Findikoglu designs pieces that reference feminine corporality, she is exalting the feminine, but acknowledging fashion as a significatory simulation. Femininity is constituted in cultural terms through dress. And I said, so our ideas of femininity are constructed through socially negotiated understandings of vestiment many times. But also, the clothes are symbolic of women's lived existences, the painful constriction of corsetry. Being a woman is confinement and it's restriction sometimes. Idealized visions of entering the workforce prove to be a layered veneer for suffering and complexity. And I'm speaking about the business attire, you know, this corporate looking attire. Just because you as a woman, again, break the glass ceiling, it doesn't mean that women are liberated inherently. It doesn't mean that you're not always also just trying to obtain the power that white cishet men have, and that isn't still terrible and still oppressive to a lot of people. And it's also just like, it's not even to say that it's liberatory for you. You're still navigating the patriarchy in every other aspect of life. It's inescapable, right? It's something that we're confined to regardless. Like when you're navigating in the coffee shop line, if somebody cuts in front of you because he's a man and he feels like he can, you being a boss at work doesn't change that. He still felt that he could do that because of the ways that masculinity and patriarchy have been constructed throughout history, you know? And it's worth thinking about. And then in terms of the constrictive nature of navigating the patriarchy, I think that that's represented in the corsetry, and kind of that desire to escape that confinement. I think it's represented in the corsetry, including when it comes to expressing yourself. As you can see, and I mean, you even saw in SHOWstudio, like the way that she's representing womanhood, to her, I'm sure, felt like a representation of strength, but it could still be interpreted as not feminist or reductive or too sexualized. And so it's like, that's the constraint of navigating the patriarchy, that when you're trying to work towards your own liberation and express yourself in a way that is multiplicative and strong, people still see you as weak and as stupid and as feeble and as controlled by men. And so it's this constrictive, like tight, weaving around you that you don't really even have a choice over. So I said corporate jobs serve as environments where women still lose autonomy, authority, and have to preserve aspects of their desirability and still maintain the integrity of positions as leaders within those spaces, which I think is the case. Like when women have to be leaders in corporate spaces, they have to be mean but not too mean. They get called the B word. They get seen as, you know, shrill and negative, whereas a man might be seen as a leader. He might be seen as strong. He might be seen as guiding us, trusted. I think people undermine women as leaders a lot more often. No matter how experienced and tenured they are and how much effective work that they've done in their categories, people assume it would be better to just have like a neutral third party, and it could be a man, even if the man isn't neutral and isn't a third party and is completely injected into this process. It just seems like men, to people, because of misogyny, are more neutral, are more objective, are more level-headed, are more logical because of the ways that we see womanhood. And being a leader and being at the top position does not reduce that. You know, it can make it even worse for you and put a brighter spotlight on those kinds of disparities in treatment for women. So yeah, sorry, I'm like really into what I'm reading and I'm kind of hyperactive, so I just realized I have on kind of like professor voice. I'm so sorry about that. I did not even notice until just now. I've been kind of vibing through it, but it was giving very much professor voice. I apologize, but it's like when I get super enthusiastic, that's kind of how I talk. So sorry if it was weird. I said the labeled looks speak to her love of collecting, and her work effectively balances subjectivity, sensitive representations of her ways of understanding femininity, and politicized objectivity that is transgressive and considers the experiences of women across several axes. And so the source for some of this is Alison Bancroft's Leigh Bowery, Queer in Fashion, Queer in Art. Alison Bancroft is always going to be your go-to to critically think through fashion, history, art, or anything. So that's the source for the Leigh Bowery quotes. And then I said I love that she loves Victorian references, which leads her to be compared to Galliano and McQueen and Westwood, and reconstructive fashion like Margiela. So that's why she's compared to Margiela very often, especially with the same movement choreography. from the last shows. I said I like that the clothes are disheveled and include all kinds of objects that women carry with them, the different archetypes of women with layered and repurposed objects to reveal women's relationships with their own bodies, their positions as mothers, daughters, and sisters, objects of desire, survivors, strong, weak, dominant, and submissive, reclaiming strength and multiplicity over sexual desire, and as always, foregrounding the contrivance of feminine existence through vestimental ornament, which means like showing that being what a woman is and femininity is something that we make up through getting dressed. I loved it. I thought Dilara killed it. I thought Dilara tore. And I will leave you at the end of this video with my map that I made in Milan, which is I guess where I wrote this. Or maybe a couple of days later I was in Milan, but I wrote a map because I got lost in Milan. I've already told the story on my Instagram. And so I had to handwrite a map, several maps for the next time that I left the hotel. So stupid. Cheers. Thank you guys for watching.